Good morning and welcome to the second edition of the water-related webinars organized by the International Center on Climate Governance. I'm Jaroslav Miziak and I am happy to introduce our speaker, Professor Alberto Garrido. Professor Garrido is a distinguished and well-known expert, Professor of Agricultural and Natural Resource Economics at the Technical University of Madrid. He is also Deputy Director of the Research Center on Management of Agricultural and Environmental Risk and Deputy Director of the Water Observatory of the Botin Foundation. He has written or co-authored a huge number of scientific publications, journal articles, and book chapters. He is an expert and advisor to a number of international organizations, including FAO, World Bank, and OECD. His today's speech will be concentrating on water challenges in the agriculture sectors.
Yes. Hello, good morning. I hope you can hear me correctly. I'm very pleased of being here at Fondazione Enrico Mattei in this second webinar organized by the International Center for Climate Governance. I'd like to also to acknowledge my institutions, the Technical University of Madrid and my research center, CEIDRAN, which is the Research for the Management of Agricultural and Environmental Risks, and of course the Botin Foundation within the Water Observatory. I've been doing much of the work I've been talking about today. Also, for those that are interested in going through my presentation after my talk, I'd like to stress the fact that I'm using the work of other authors and I'm quoting the references and the sources. So please don't go to the source because I'm reporting the results and the concepts of some other people as well. Now, getting into the topic of water challenges in the agricultural sector, you must know that this is really a huge topic. Starting by the fact that agriculture production uses almost 70–80% of all the water that humans use for any productive activity. So you can imagine that any advance, any breakthrough in this sector has huge implications for the world and for many countries that are undergoing processes of water stress. Well, let me just start by saying something about the global perspective. Global water scarcity is driven by, first, world's present and future food demand. Now, future food demand depends primarily on two factors. One is the population of the world in the upcoming decades, like 2020, 2030, 2040. And the other factor is income of the people. And this is related to food consumption habits. I'll make the case in my talk that world's water demand is, in a sense, driven by how people feed themselves. Because, as I said at the beginning, agricultural water consumption is about 70–80% of all total use. There is also global water environmental insecurity, and that is related to pollution, over-extractions at massive scales in some areas. We all know that. However, there are solutions for both scarcity and environmental insecurity. And don't forget that unlike CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, water is a renewable resource. That means the amount of water that is in the atmosphere is fixed, and it's just the water cycle what we can control. I'm going to talk about these 7 issues: water, global water scarcity. I'm going to say a few ideas about crops water demand, how much water is optimal. I'm going to talk also about efficiency increases, yield gaps and technology, and the water and energy nexus. Global water scarcity. There are 4 main drivers of this: the expansion of trade and globalization, environmental-driven scarcity, global risk perceptions, and water and food security. Expansion of trade and globalization. In the graph to your right, you can see how the value of exports has been growing significantly in all industrial and economic sectors, including agriculture. In this second graph, you can see the amount of calories that have been traded in the world since 1970. Right now, world's agriculture relies significantly on food trade. And the world, you can say that it's feeding itself primarily based on production produced in a country that is not your own country. And that applies to many, many countries, including Europe, Asia, and also the exporting countries, like America or some other areas. Environmental water scarcity. In the map, you can see the percentage of population with sanitation. The darker the map, the country is the largest penetration of sanitation services. There's still a significant amount of countries and population that is not serviced with sufficiently sanitation services. And this is a source of water contamination and a source of pollution, and that also lowers the quality of water for any other sector, including environmental protection. Focusing on global water scarcity, these are the issues that have been ranked in as top global risk factors as obtained or gathered and reported by World Economic Forum of Davos. You can see that water supply crises have been number 2 preoccupation in the world in 2012, 2013. In 2014, last year, was water crisis, and this last January, water crisis tops the agenda in terms of preoccupation and a sort of risk, according to the World Economic Forum of Davos. So there might be, this is a concern that the international community, the leaders that gather in Davos every year, put the water crisis on top of the agenda. Water and food security. This graph shows the water footprint of many countries in the world as produced by Hoekstra and Mekonic in a very well-known article published a couple of years ago. Here, in this evaluation of water footprint, about 25% is related to food production, and from that amount, about 40 to 50% of that water footprint of all the countries in the world, all the people that live in the world right now, is related to the consumption of animal products, livestock sector. So as you can see, there is a connection between food demand, food habits, and food production, and that is really driven by the production of agricultural products. And any question related to water in any country is related to food production, and significant part of this is related to the consumption of meat products. Here we are connecting the graph that I show about trade and water. This is also an article produced by Darling and collaborators about the amount of water that is traded virtually in the world. The size of the circle represents the amount of water that is that was traded in 1986 and in 2007. And you can see the different areas, the different continents which are producing or exporting the water, and the continents that are importing that amount of water. If you look at the bottom right-hand side, you can see that SA, that means South America, has become the major supplier of virtual water in the world, both for Asia and also for Europe. And the scale of virtual water has been multiplied by a factor of 4 in just 20 years. According to some evaluations, about 500 cubic kilometers are traded virtually every year. And that represents about 15% of all the water that is used in agriculture in the world. So this is one way to convey the idea of trade, agriculture, and the amount of water that is traded virtually through the trade of agricultural commodities and the expansion of trade and water use. Now let's move to the second point, gross water demand. Gross water demand depends on the process that you all know, photosynthesis. That's a process that converts light energy into chemical energy. And the chemical energy is stored in carbohydrate molecules such as sugars, which are synthesized from carbon dioxide and water. In the photo, you can see the amount of photosynthesis that is produced in the world. And you can see that the darker green areas are those that receive more water, whereas the lighter areas are the driest areas in the world. So photosynthesis is related to the amount of water that is stored in the soil, and it's more important in the areas which receive more precipitation. There are two types of plants with regards to the efficiency with which photosynthesis is performed. We have the C4 plants and the C3 plants. C4 plants have a competitive advantage over plants possessing the more common C3 carbon resection pathway. Some of the C4 plants are corn or maize, sugarcane or millet, whereas the C3 plants are wheat, the cereals that are commonly used. At 33 degrees, C3 gases lose approximately 833 molecules of water per CO2 of molecule fix, whereas C4 plants lose only 277. These numbers are approximate, but it gives you an idea on the amount of water that is used by plants to fix one molecule of CO2. And this is the process that developed 3 billion years ago in the Earth, and that's where plants have evolved to develop this photosynthesis process. We rely entirely, the world, wildlife, all the system really relies on photosynthesis. And we can't change significantly these efficiency rates. We cannot change them. Let me make this point clear. Photosynthesis is related to annual precipitation, humidity, and the latitudinal regions. It depends on sun radiation and the altitude belts as well. So the largest evaporation traits are in the desert areas, where at the lower latitudinal regions and in the lower altitudinal belts, which is connected to biotemperature. This is something that is really, in a sense, provides an idea what the photosynthesis activity is in the different areas of the world. I like to make one point clear. We cannot increase biomass without reduction evapotranspiration, which is the water that is consumed by the photosynthesis and the plant's growth. In this graph, you can see that, and there are thousands of them, there is a direct connection between evapotranspiration, water consumed, water evaporated, and the biomass production. This is, in a sense, fixed for any plant species and any system. We cannot grow more plants without reducing evapotranspiration. Now, let's move to the third point. How much water use is optimal? Well, there is clearly a response curve which is specific for each plant and each species. In the top graph, you can see simulated yields by quinoa, by the program Aquacrop. And in the bottom graph, you can see the water productivity. And there is a maximum of water productivity in the range of between 300 and 400 millimeters of water applied, water evapotranspirated. If we move to the economics part of it, you have a response function you have relative yields and you have relative evapotranspiration. Of course, the maximum that you can produce, it's in the plateau here, and you don't want to go beyond that point in terms of water application because that's going to be a waste of resources. But you don't want to remain short of the water application that you need to produce. But there's no economics dimension in this graph. If we move here to the following two graphs, you see two different scenarios. In the first scenario to your left, you have a concern for quality of the product, and I'll give you an example of that. You have the relative revenue here in this axis, you have the relative price, and you have the largest relative price and revenue in a position in which you don't reach the maximum relative yield. This would be a situation that could be approximated by the production of wine grapes. Would you are not targeting the largest production, you are targeting the largest quality, and for that sense you would be applying less water than gives you the maximum yields in terms of kilograms per hectare, because you are focusing on quality, the quality of the grapes for producing wine. If you move to the right graph, it's a different situation with the fruit size matters. That means the value of the fruit is related to the size of the fruit, and in this situation it would be really important to go to the plateau to make sure that the value of the product is the largest, the revenue is the largest, and the relative price of the product is the largest. And in this situation, it would be much more difficult to reduce the amount of water if you are focusing on the value of the crop as much as the value, as much as the amount of product. Okay, I'd like to raise a point that it's been mentioned by many scientists about the increases in efficiency. And I'm particularly focusing on improvements of one single metric, like the kilograms produced by cubic meter, or the amount of water that is needed to produce 1 kilogram of product. My point here is that if you focus on just one single metric, maybe efficiency increases might be misleading. And this criticism, or at least this concern, might apply to water footprint measurements. And I must say, I've been looking at water footprint evaluations for many years so far. But fortunately, both the water footprint assessments developed by the Water Footprint Network and the recently approved norm or standard of the International Standard Organization 14046 now put the focus on not only on water footprint assessments, but also on the impact assessments. This is one of the main messages I'd like to convey in this webinar. We really need to put in context the evaluations on single metrics, because we are really looking for assessments of the impacts of water use. Now let's review this simple example where you have irrigation efficiency of 40%. There's an abstraction from the river of 100 units, which at the end you use because only 19, because 10 are losing in the transportation. You have a yield of 100 kilos, and you have a consumption in terms of evapotranspiration that is 36, of which 24 are beneficial for production and 12 are non-beneficial. At the end, you have 36 units of water consumed, lost in terms of evapotranspiration, and you have a net consumption of 36 with a final result of 164 units. So you have this agricultural water productivity in terms of kilograms per cubic meter, depending on the point of evaluation. It's in water withdrawals, water applied, or water consumed. However, if you increase efficiency to 60% and you do no water spreading, then you can increase your water applied productivity, you can keep the same amount of water consumed, and then you have a really genuine positively increase of water efficiency, because you have the same water use with the same 24 beneficial units of water and 12 non-beneficial units of water. A different situation would be water spreading. Here, you increase production and you might keep the same water productivity, but at the end, you might end up increasing more water in the river. That means in the water system. The environmental impact is going to be higher because you are consuming, that means 54 water units, and your impact in the river has been increased. And even though you're producing more, if you're looking at the impact, then even though you increase the water productivity in the farm, the final impact on the basin is higher. So the conclusion of these simple graphs are: you have to be very careful when you talk about increases in irrigation. You have to evaluate different efficiency indicators, not only those that are related to the final product, but also those that are related to the environmental domain or environmental impact. And I show a case in which efficiency is neutral to the river flow, and the last one which is not neutral but is detrimental to the flows of the river. So not all cases of technical improvement save water resources. The focus must be placed on savings of irretrievable losses, that is essentially evapotranspiration. This should be our standard. This should be our major standard for measuring efficiency increases in irrigation. Okay, let's move to yield gaps and technology. Now, there is some discussion in the world whether the expansion of agriculture to meet the world's food demand should be focusing on yield gaps and intensification versus the expansion of land and water use. Clearly here, the conclusion, the consensus is about the mantra, the new mantra, which is called sustainable intensification. I must warn you all that this sustainable intensification, it's a concept that is difficult to apply because we don't know too much about what it means exactly in every place and every location. There is also some focus on reducing food waste, because reducing food waste is one way to reduce water consumption for agriculture and food consumption. Also, there is a meat challenge. And clearly, the change of diets, which is a question of taste, preferences, and prices, it's also a fundamental factor because of the connection between the production of animal products and the impact on agricultural production. And of course, environmental effects on water pollution. This table shows the annual growth of productivity for three main crops in the world regions for two periods, 1961 and 90, the first period, and between 1991 and 2010. And here we're showing the annual growth of productivities. And you can see at world rates in the first round that in the 3 crops, the annual growth of productivity has been reduced from the second period with respect to the first period, covering 61 and 90. The yellow cells show the increases of productivity, but most of the productivities that are shown here have been reduced. And if you combine these 20 years of slow productivity, that means that we've missed huge water and land use savings. In the case of maize, it might be the case of 10% missed savings of water and land. But for the cases of wheat and rice, that would be 48% and 22% for rice and okay. So this is an important message, because had we kept the productivity gains of the first 30 years, the first period, then we would have saved a significant amount of water and land for producing these crops. Now, how much irrigation water is needed to produce 1 apple? Here I'm relying on data of my friend Joan Girona from IRCA, Catalonia. They've been doing research. There is a typical number here that you need 70 liters to produce 1 apple. However, research carried out by our Catalan colleagues shows that you use flooding techniques, you might use 55 liters to produce an apple. Using drip irrigation with not much knowledge, then that number was reduced to 49 liters. With some knowledge, the figure went down to 30, and even to 28, even to 24, applying the knowledge. And finally, with reduced irrigation, that number has been reduced to 17 liters to produce an apple. So you can see here the size of and the amount of knowledge and technology in terms of producing a single product, an apple. In Spain, we performed sustainability assessment of agriculture between 1980 and 28. 28, and evaluated the amount of euros that you need, the amount of euros you can produce with an hectare or a unit of water, energy, and soil. And this is the case of olive groves. The technology gains that have been produced have been very, very significant in just 20 years. More than a double of the growth of yields have been possible, and that has been converted into significant reductions of land, water, energy, and soil losses. This is the case for maize production, where you have the footprint here significant going down in those 28 years. And these numbers here represent the efficiency gains of this production for maize, for melon, for orange trees, sugar beet, tomato, and wheat. The percentages of reduction in the amount of resources needed to produce 1 unit have been significant. Finally, here, this is one recent article published a few months ago only, looking at the value of images to show how much water is needed in different areas in order to follow up the water stress and see exactly how much stress is suffering each of the single trees of a plantation. And you can see here in the right-hand side photo where some of the trees in this part of the plot are suffering much more water stress than other trees located in the downhill parts. So this just shows how technology can help follow up irrigation, and how can this knowledge be used to reduce the amount of water that is needed to produce 1 unit of product. Now let's move to an important topic as well, my final topic in the talk, water and energy nexus. First question, is there a trade-off between water and energy use to produce? And we're going to show here the data for the Spanish transformation of its irrigation sector. On your left, you can see water use in terms of average cubic meters used per hectare. And on the right scale, you can see the energy use in terms of kilowatts per hectare. You can see the trade-off that has occurred in 60 years of history of irrigation. Significant reduction of water applications and a significant consumption of energy. So yes, there is a trade-off between water and energy. And here you can see the amount of energy used to apply 1 cubic meter in the Spanish irrigation sector. It has been multiplied by a factor of 10 in the last 60 years. So now water and energy are used in combination to apply water. And the reason for that is that all systems that have been transformed into drip and sprinkler sector use much more energy than traditional flood irrigation. And this has to be taken into account. Now to finalize my presentation, the new mantra, sustainability and justification. The idea of using a general indicator in which you want to increase the ratio between value and resources. But you can increase that by 4 different means. You can increase value with more growth than resources. With that, you can increase the indicator. You can increase the value and reduce the resources. You can stabilize the value and diminish the resources. And finally, you can reduce value but reduce resources more quickly. Now, what is the adequate way to increase the sustainability of production? It really depends on the area, and defining which case is more appropriate. That's the role of policy. It's not the role of corporations or farmers, because farmers or corporations are interested in increasing the profits. But sometimes we want to increase the indicator, sustainability indicator, by reducing the amount of resources, because you may be interested in doing that in an area which is already stressed. So the indicator itself is not sufficient to guide and orient the policy approach in each area. There are 4 ways to increase the indicator, and each of the 4 ways might have an appropriate area to be applied. Finally, more crops control means more resource efficiency, better climate change adaptation. Irrigation is fundamental. It's a fundamental strategy for combating climate change in semi-arid countries. It is one way to increase production and one way to increase sustainability. Large irrigated areas and water use are associated with reduced vulnerability to drought. This is a misleading and confusing statement that claims that the areas that use more water for agriculture are more vulnerable. And my point is the other way around. The areas in which agriculture uses the largest percentage are the areas that better prepare to undergo and cope with a drought. And we saw that with the significant drought that California is still undergoing, and that has lasted for a number of years. Last 2 comments. There are plant physiology constraints. More biomass production comes with larger water use. It is very difficult to change this, and so far the gains in the area of genetics are not so much important, because photosynthesis has a certain amount of efficiency. Finally, the more arid the climate, the greater the importance of water versus productivity. Water policy in this case should be a priority. So thank you very much, and I'm available for your questions and your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for this very interesting and exciting talk. I would like to invite the audience, the participants. We haven't received many questions from the audience, so please, if you have specific questions, please post them in the chat, in the facility which allows you to post questions. I would start, if I may, Alberto. I was really puzzled about the slide where you showed that there was reduced growth of agricultural productivity. It was somewhere on the slide 5, yield gaps and technology, and you have shown two periods, 1961 and 1990, for maize, wheat and rice. I was just wondering what might be the reasons behind the slowdown of the productivity gains, or more specifically, is there, in your opinion, also climate change might be, might play a role in these?
Okay, thank you, Jared. That's a very good question. I would not be very confident in claiming that that's climate change. I'm not sure. So my answer, my best guess would be, first of all, that during the 1961-1990, the first period of the table, that's where the green revolution occurred. That was where the major improvements in genetics, plant genetics, occurred. So those gains that are significant, if you look at the maize, for example, with annual productivity gains of about 2% per year, or even 3%, that's related to the improvements of plant genetics. In the second period, yes, there has been some improvement, but they went down significantly as a result of reduced investment in the science of plant genetics. And there is some consensus that this has been the reason for the reduction of productivity gains in the world. And because since the early 1990s, the prices of the major commodities were following a lower trend, and the international community, all countries and international organizations, were not concerned about productivity gains because the prices of all products, most products, have been very low since the 1970s, and there was no reason to keep on investing in the science of plant genetics. But right now, after the food crisis of 2007 and 8, there has been a renewed attention to keep on increasing the growth of productivity. And also the idea, the new idea of sustainable intensification requires that yield keeps on growing, because we want to get more of the same land and water that you're using, instead of keeping expanding the agricultural frontier or keeping expanding water consumption. So perhaps in the next decade, we might see the numbers of productivity increasing as a response to the new attention to this area.
Thank you, Alberto. We have a comment to this question from Daniel Bachmann from the participants, who is suggesting that in contribution to the annual growth rates, it could also well be that the resources, especially soils, have been depleted due to intensive use during the 60s and 90s. So the natural resources cannot produce well enough to compete with the human demand for food. Would that be in line with your thinking and your opinion?
Jaro, could you repeat the question again, please?
Right.
I'd like to.
It's not a question. It's a comment from Daniel Bachmann from the audience. He suggested that the soil has been exploited in the 60s and 90s, so that the soil fertility was depleted over those years. And
Okay.
it might also be the cause of the reduced productivity.
Yes, it might be the case that unsustainable farming practices might explain why these numbers have been going down in the second period. It might be the case, and in fact, there has been some evaluations about the amount of land that has been completely deteriorated and lost all fertility, and this might be the case. So. So this is really stresses one of the comments I was making at the end of my talk, where you really need to look at the 4 ways to increase sustainability production. It might be the case for for many rural agricultural areas where you want to increase your sustainability indicator by reducing your resource use. That means reducing the amount of water, land, or energy. So that's certainly the case. But right now, tillage practices have been improved a lot. The conservation of soils, and there is a science and there is a technology now that allows for better tillage that keeps fertility and keeps the top layers of the soil better taken care of. So yes, I agree with the comment of Daniel. It might be the case, but there's also the question that I mentioned before about reduced gains in genetic potential that in the second period with respect to the first one.
Thank you very much, Alberto. We are now receiving a number of questions and comments, and I would perhaps choose this one from Rafael Fernandez Gomez and others. That's also echoed by other participants. Rafael asked, what are the main common challenges of water in agriculture at European countries level, taking into account the diversity of region and countries? From your point of view, Alberto, it seems that we have a huge number of participants from Europe. So the question is, what are the key challenges on the interface between water and agriculture, specifically in Europe?
Okay, yes, there are many types of agricultural areas in Europe and irrigated areas. If you look at the southern part of the European Union, you will see really intensive horticulture, fruit agriculture production, and that doesn't have anything to do with more extensive systems that you can find in France or Spain or Italy, in the northern parts of these countries. Clearly, the challenges are to do the environmental revolution. That means how we can make sure that the externalities, the pollution that comes out of the intensive agricultural areas in Europe are reduced, and that means keeping track of the pollutants that end up in the environment, and that relates to nitrates, to agrochemical contamination, and this is the main challenge for all agricultural areas that are irrigated in Europe. The objective, of course, of a farmer is to increase benefits, increase production, and it's very difficult to transmit the idea that keeping the pollutants and the loads of pollutants that end up in the systems being reduced, because it is very difficult to control, and it's very difficult to know how much of the agrochemicals of the nitrates comes from every farm. So in my view, this is the main challenge, and it's not easy how to achieve that. But that would be my conclusion. Because we can save water, that's clearly the case. And even water policy, the European Water Framework Directive, will be eventually deliver benefits. But in terms of water pollution and water contamination, we still have a long way to go.
Thank you very much, Alberto. We have another question from Beris Guain. It's a long question. I'd like to shorten it a little bit. The question is, do you see any potential deal breaker that might facilitate an effective action in Europe or elsewhere? So what should be done in order to make a breakthrough in the way water is managed in agriculture or for food production in order to become more efficient?
Okay, my perception is that we are. This is a gradual process, and I think it is really going on that the technology and the knowledge of water use and irrigation in Europe is really quite effective, and the science of it is really reaching the fields in a sense that it's really being applied by many farmers in Europe. So for the moment, clearly the idea I've related this comment to my previous comment. How we can make sure that we reduce the contamination, the pollution processes that are related to intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture means a lot of capital investment, and to make sure that these capital investments have a return, that means that that farmers have to get very important profits and revenue, and so they really bring the system to the largest potential, to the final, the largest production that you can get, and it is very difficult to really to take a couple of steps back and see how you can maintain the profits and the revenue of the farmers and still reduce the amount of pollutants. Because let me just make one comment, Gerald, that this is really important. We're doing a lot of research on the use of agrochemicals, and certainly the European Union has reduced the amount of registered products, of plant protection products that can be used in Europe. And farmers are seeing a significant reduction of the strategies and the products that they can use to fight pests, weeds, and disease, plant disease. So it is becoming increasingly more difficult for farmers to keep their crops healthy, and certainly the European Union is really reducing the choice of instrument that they can use. So this is really changing, and this is really a driver of improvement. But I must say that farmers are struggling to cope with this problem. So this is one way to look at the problem: the difficulties of keeping their crops healthy and seeing the number of products that they can use reduce year after year.
Thank you, Alberto. We have several technical questions or more specific questions. The first by Andreas Venta asks, what you think is the most appropriate and precise parameter for irrigation scheduling to measure the optimal range of water availability for grape, Guinness, and other crops? So what is the parameter that we should look at in irrigation scheduling?
Okay, depending on what you want to look at. If you want to look at the analysis of the entire system, there's no one single indicator. You should focus on at least 3-4 indicators. And in this sense, experts have identified at least 7 or 8 different indicators of efficiency. And that's that depends on what you want to look at. My response would be you have to look at not one single indicator, and not even one single indicator of water use, but also energy and pollution. So the idea of using more complete set of indicators not only looking at water consumption, but also energy emissions and some other indicators would be the advisory way to really get a sense of what are the gains of productivity and efficiency of one system. So my response would be, it is not enough to just look at one metric, not even to look at just water metrics, but also all the metrics are necessary to get an idea of efficiency. Energy is a very important factor right now in running irrigation systems.
Thank you very much, Alberto. You have also responded to some other questions that ask about what alternative indicators should be used in addition to value per crop produced. There is another question, more technical question by Aicha Horak. I hope I'm pronouncing the names correctly. If not, please apologize. So the question is, Alberto, for you, have you thought to use solar thermal desalination for agriculture purposes, irrigation purposes, and production? Do you think, is it efficient? So the question is whether the renewable energy sources might help to reduce the energy demand of more efficient water application in agriculture.
That's a good question. Yes, there are some initiatives, and I've seen some projects that use renewable energy to supply energy to farmers, and also energy to desalinize water, so that farmers can use that non-conventional water source. Right now, if farmers have to pay the full price of that water or that energy, I'm focusing more on water than on energy here. My guess would be that very few crops and very few farming systems can really make a money paying the water as expensive as that would be. But that doesn't mean that we should not keep on improving the systems, because my knowledge about renewable energy sources is that the gains of one single technology after making technical improvements in this single technology are in the range of 2 to 3%. So if you combine those improvements, and you can reduce significantly the amount of the cost of producing that kind of energy, and that eventually will reach also the cost of desalinized water. So I don't see that as a major commercial alternative for most farms in Europe, but I see the value of keeping the study and the research and the technology development of these technologies, because eventually it might be the case that it will be worth competitive to use a renewable resource to desalinize water and to even produce commercial agriculture production.
Thank you, Alberto. I think this nicely wraps up the discussion of today's webinar. For those of you who joined this webinar a little bit later, let me remind you that our guest of today is Professor Alberto Garrido from Technical University of Madrid, and he talked about water challenges in agriculture sector. Thank you very much, Alberto, for being with us and for your thoughts. Thank you very much to all of you who attended this webinar. And Alberto, just an information for you, there were some 70 participants from, I guess, all around Europe and the globe. We apologize for not having been able to flesh out all your questions. They arrived eventually, many questions. We tried to pick up the most important ones for the talk. Thank you very much to Alberto. Thank you very much to all the participants. Thank you for following us. Now I have one announcement. There will be the next webinar, the next issue of the webinar series of International Center on Climate Governance will take place on 14 April, and the invited speaker will be Pasquale Steduto from FAO Water Development and Management Unit. There is I invite you to register for the next webinar. You will find all the information on the website of the International Center on Climate Governance. So thank you again and have a nice day.